Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the evening, I'm Joe Doolittle.
Good morning, I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience, which is broadcast at many times in many different places.
So if it's really morning where you are, then that's just a function of saying hello. And we're glad you're here. And if you're joining us for the first time, we're really pleased. And if you're a return visitor to our show, we're especially thankful, and we'll look forward to updating you on some of the things that are going on in storytelling. And we have a wonderful guest storyteller tonight. So.
Of course, we always have wonderful guests, but
That's true.
This guest is really, really wonderful. One of the first storytellers I heard, I think,
Right.
when I came to this area and fell in love with storytelling.
And we're going to keep it a secret for just a minute, because Kate and I, since this is summertime, we haven't been hanging out together much. And you've been doing some interesting things. And one of the things that you did that my vacation got in the way of helping her with was a performance here at the Colonie Library, because in one of the aspects of our partnership, more than occasionally, we like to do a performance here just to get storytelling live and in place right here where we tape our show.
And as a thank you to the library personnel who help us put on this show. Without them, we'd be in the dark.
So how did it go?
It went very well. It was a family program, and there were 7 years old plus or minus 4 kind of thing. There were about 50 people.
Wonderful.
So they had to get more chairs. And they loved I am the ghost with a one black eye. And a squeaky door.
You told ghost stories?
Just one.
Just one.
Just one. Well, it starts out very, very scary. Once there was a family eating breakfast around their kitchen table. There was the mother and the father and the older brother and the older sister and the baby. The baby held out her sippy cup and said, I want more apple juice. And that surprisingly caused a lot of problems.
Apple juice?
Apple juice.
Well, my apologies for not being there to participate, because I know you were going to have a good time, and I know that the audience was going to have a good time. So that's great. That's great. And if you're interested in those programs, they're on the Colonie Library website kind of whenever we have them. So please stay tuned for those. Now, Kate, you've been traveling a bit too. And I heard when I saw Jerry, your husband, the other night, he said that you had to take 2 rental cars to get to the airport from the National Storytelling Network program out in Phoenix.
Well, I don't know which one of you got that wrong, but
Well, no, I'm just curious, because I mean, if you were all the way. This is a big gathering of storytellers, and it's the one time during the year where people come together from literally all over the world
Right.
to plug in to the method and the spirit of storytelling. And I didn't get to go, but you got to go.
right. I went, and actually the Mark Goldberg out there arranged for local storytellers to pick up people at the airport.
Really?
And so we paid them rather than a cab, and got to talk storytelling. So I did that. So I didn't need the rental car then, but
sorry.
afterwards, after the conference was over, a dear friend of mine who used to live in this area, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years, lives near Sedona, about an hour and a half north of Phoenix. So after the conference, I rented the rental car, saw her, drove myself back to the Phoenix airport, flew to Albuquerque, rented another car so I could drive to Santa Fe and see the George O'Keeffe Museum, and then drive another hour and a half north of there and visit the only home of hers that's open on tours.
Oh, wonderful.
In Abiquiu.
Now, are you working on some Georgia O'Keeffe stories?
I have a Georgia O'Keeffe story that I told at Weowaka in June as part of women artists from the 20th century. And I guess by the time this September program is broadcast, I also did it again at the end of August because the first show sold out.
So the first time you did this Swiawaka, which is a women's institute on the southern end of Lake George, for those of you who don't know, you actually were oversubscribed?
Yes. Yes, it was...
Arcade oversubscribed?
A program with, since it's artists, storytellers can wave their arms and do a lot of magic, but about artists, you really need to see their work to really convey to others what you're talking about. So I had a slide presentation that went with that, and then we had a dinner, a Southwestern dinner, a chicken stew over cornbread.
Well,
and so they could only seat 45 for dinner. So that was the limiting.
Now, I'm going to try to digress a little bit here because I want to ask you how your stories about Georgia O'Keeffe may have changed because you actually went to the place where she lived.
Oh, going to her place was so cool. That the home that I went to, and the other home, I've seen pictures of that, looks out on the mountains that she painted. And the particular home I was at, there was a green valley because there's a river running through it. And it had alfalfa growing and the cottonwood trees that she painted. And it also had, she was one that always, she said, always was picking up things as a child and as an adult. And so there were rocks that she had picked up, a big pile outside the front door and on the ledge of her studio and in one of the rooms. And so it was natural when she went to New Mexico, in addition to picking up rocks, and well, there weren't many shells there, she picked up bones because she was just that kind of person.
And even though you knew those kinds of things from your research, experiencing it in the first person makes it a deeper understanding.
Right, and there was an elk skull that she painted, and it's hanging up in the hallway from the main door that goes into the courtyard. There it is, and then a pottery bowl, and there's pictures of her sitting right where I was.
Now I just need to share a couple of references for the art of storytelling, because folks, what you just heard was a pretty significant word picture that caught us all. And Kate is a master at giving you enough detail so you get all the significance of the present scope without running on and on and on about all that detail. And so stories depend on a lot of things, but a little artful detail really helps them, and that was just super. That was just super. So, and method is important, and one of the things that we strive for in these shows is to share not only the art of storytelling as a performance, and we have a guest who's going to do that for us, but also some of the method and the development side of how you acquire a story on the road to Sedona and Albuquerque and those places, because that's where stories bump into you and we meet them. Speaking of bumping into, I've never really bumped into Mary Murphy, but
It's a pleasurable experience.
It is.
So I've been told.
Mary Murphy is from Albany, New York, and she's one of the nicest and one of the most stylish storytellers I've ever been around. And I love the way she lives up to her Irish heritage and the way she tells stories. Mm-hmm. You are a magical spinner of tales, Mary Murphy.
Thank you very much. Yes,
and we're so glad that you're here with us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
And most of her stories are touching and humorous.
Right.
So it's a wonderful combination. Reflecting life is touching and humorous.
Right.
And some disasters, minor, that she's shared so far. But
I have a question for you, Kate, before we go on here, and that is, I wanted to know, did you do a workshop at the national conference?
Yes, I did. I did a workshop on finding, crafting, and telling stories of real people who made a difference, which is the main body of my work. I tell other stories too, but most of the stories I'm creating now fall under that. And I've been doing that for about 12 years now. And I think I counted like 80 stories I've done like that. Wow. So I've come up with, I was sharing what has helped, what I've stumbled into and how I organize things, hoping that more people will tell these kinds of stories, because I find some of them are stories of, famous people that you know, and I want to know why they did their work or how they did their work. Some is just regular people who rose to an occasion, and it could have, it could be the civil rights workers who put their necks on the line. It could be someone who just was gracious and did the right thing, and they all are beacons for us to follow, and the antithesis of most of the news stories that you hear, which concentrate on all the bad.
Right.
So just so that everybody understands, you were faculty at the
I got
conference.
paid in honorarium.
No kidding.
Yes, didn't make a dent in my airfare, but
No wonder she could afford 2 rental cars.
Oh,
Just we got an honorarium.
But did you have a big crowd at your workshop?
the room was filled. I had about 50 people.
Well, that interests me, because I think that your storytelling, your personal stories, are nonfiction, but they're in the third person. They're about other people.
Yes.
And that's a kind of unique niche, if you will, because a lot of us do stories in the first person, stories from our own lives, but this is different. And I think that it's probably something whose time has come.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I told the first version of this workshop at the Timpanogos conference about 6 years ago. There are about 20 people there. And then I told it at Sharing the Fire, the Northeast conference. And we were around a conference table, bigger than this, but there were 12 or 15. And then I told it at Northlands in Wisconsin, and there are about 30. So I didn't know how many the National would. And they're simultaneous workshops.
Right.
I didn't focus in on what I was up against, my competition.
Right.
I just
You don't want to think about that.
Right.
Yes.
But so I was very pleased with the turnout, that I got at least my fair share of the conference attendees.
I think you should, yes.
Yeah, I
So-
think that's...
Now, was there a big emphasis on personal stories at that?
The theme was stories of fire and light.
Yeah.
And so these stories, I could pitch that my workshop fit into the theme.
Yes.
The fire were the people's passion, and the light were the change that they made.
Right. It's very interesting.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
And I'm always curious whenever you teach, you always kind of build relationships with people in the audience. What have you heard from any of those students? I'd imagine you get kind of in dialogue with bits of work, or
Not,
too soon for
it's
that?
too soon. Though, well, one of the places where I recommended people to find stories was to become Michael McCarty's Facebook friend, because he sends out about 5 or 6 things that he has picked up. He must be on some sort of mailing list, and each day, and a couple of them are usually about remarkable people. And so I know I've picked up Osceola McCarty, the laundress in Mississippi, who retired at age 84, had lived very simply. And when she and her banker decided how much she needed for the rest of her life, she donated the rest of it to the University of Mississippi in Harrisburg, $120,000. A laundress had accumulated that much excess.
Right.
So that's pretty remarkable.
Yes.
And
Good.
yeah.
Joe, you do personal stories.
I do some personal stories, and mostly since I've had grandchildren, I've had a whole new supply. But they frame a lot of my life for me, and so I also do in my historical stuff, I tend to borrow somebody who either was related and I put them in the story, or if they weren't related, I put them in the story, kind of thing. And again, it's that third person kind of narrative, and I think it's important to get some parameters around it. I mean, when I mentioned my granddaughters, not everybody's going to hear stories about your grandkids. So you have to put a test, I think, on a personal story about whether that there's a generalizable theme to it. Or is it the kind of thing you'd share around a beer with your Uncle George or something like this? So I try to be respectful of that process when I try them on.
But you mentioned something interesting, which I'm sort of noticing myself, is that you say people don't want to hear about your grandkids. But I would say or suggest that is exactly what people want to hear about, because a lot of them have grandkids, and there's a similarity in their lives.
Or they were grandkids, so they can be looking at the story.
Right, at their grandparents. Right.
Here's an idea for this that I did in my church. I'm responsible for lining up speakers for the post-service forum, and it's kind of we have a small committee and we vet things and whatever. And on Mother's Day, which is a hard day to have post-service because everybody's going to take their mother out or my grandmother out,
right.
Whatever. So I did a program on stories of our mothers. And I told one simple story of my mother. And I read a poem by a friend of mine about sitting in a pew when she was 4 years old and fidgeting, and her mother gives her a piece of candy. And that's the poem. All the things that go on in that little transaction. And when I finished that poem and asked if anybody had a story to tell, everybody's hand went up. And I tried to limit them to 4 minutes, which is hard.
Oh, yeah.
But we had the best sharing of very wonderful stories that I've been around.
See, and that brings up another point, is that one story will lead to another story, which will lead to another story, and remind people of things. I once told a story about recital, of being in a recital and having something weird happening to me, and then a woman came up to me afterwards and told me about how she was playing the flute on stage in a concert, and half of her flute fell off. I don't know how you put the thing together, but it just fell off. I think that was Mary Fellows, actually.
Mary Fellows,
Yeah.
Mary Fellows. And half of her flute fell off.
Yeah.
That'll take the starch right out of a lot of people.
Yeah,
right?
well, you have to put it back together.
Right.
I don't think it sounds the same if you don't have all your parts together.
Right.
So,
But I like the idea that you'll hear good stories
Right.
when you tell good stories.
Right, and I share that as method because there's a book by Donald Davis that has a lot of great questions that generate personal stories, and we don't have those. It's on our resource list. But just some of those kinds of prompts for a family gathering, or for, rather than play charades. Here's one that I used in a class I taught once. Tell me a story about somebody that you loved and didn't marry. Now there was a big yield on that one. So it's kind of, and actually, if you want to tell your own personal stories, questions are helpful to answer.
Right. And it kind of gives you permission.
Right.
Oh, now I can talk about myself because you did, and you're asking me a question.
Right.
of course, when tellers are on a stage, which is different than what you've just been talking about, there are two things, in addition to looking for a universal theme that many people can relate to. One thing is, you should not be using your audience as your therapy group.
Right.
If something very serious has happened to you, you should have worked through that, the repercussions of that event.
Put that distance.
And have a distance, an emotional distance from it. And there was something else that I was going to say.
Well, I was going to say there's a quote that you've probably all heard, and you out in the audience too, that's if tragedy plus time equals comedy.
Yes.
Wow.
So at a distance, there are things that you can laugh at.
Right. And in Donald Davis's book, I remembered what I forgot. He said, well, some stories really probably shouldn't ever be told. And other stories, you might have to wait till people die, or tell them, fictionalize the setting. And
Right.
then you can share it without trampling
Jeopardizing
on
it.
their lives.
You know, this is interesting to me because I have a brother who told me a wonderful story. It involved my mother, and it was a true happening, but it was his story, and he told it to me through a microphone. Yeah, we were taping it. So I have the whole story, and then I transcribed it. And I look at it, and I want so much to tell it or get it out there, but I just don't know how to use his words and do that.
Well, my brother told me this wonderful story, and I'll share. I'd like to share it with you, as he told it to me.
Oh, okay, like in his words.
Yes.
And then go from there.
Yeah. As long as it's something that's he is giving you his permission for you to tell it. That's another thing that.
Oh, yeah.
Elizabeth Ellis told a story about her son, and then she was appalled when someone else had just lifted the story and told it as if it was about the teller's son. She said, "You can't do that. That's my story." And when she told it, Elizabeth told her son, he goes, "That was my story. That wasn't your story." And she went, "Oh,
Wow. That's interesting.
that's true. Okay, if I tell it."
That is interesting, yes. Yes.
When you decide to tell stories, personal stories, in performance, I'm reminded of one of my edit checks, and I'm pretty spontaneous, so you may be surprised that I have edit checks.
Edit
but
checks.
this is probably one of the only one. It's probably one of the only one. There's a line I picked up somewhere: is that we don't remember days, we remember moments. And the moment, in Kate's example from George O'Keeffe's house, she told us about the elk skeleton and the head and where George sat. And in that test, that was the moment.
Right.
That was the moment. She'd seen a lot of other things. She talked about alfalfa, but the moment was that sitting in George's spot, looking at that elk statue. And as a prompt for the quality of the translation of your story, thinking what the moment is a very helpful way of editing out some of the things that may be extraneous to the things. And you can test that yourself, and then you can test it when we have our story circle meetings. We often ask for feedback, and if I can think about it while I'm listening, I think about what's the moment, how do you build that into the story.
So it's located in every story someplace.
Someplace.
Yeah.
And it avoids the run-on nature of often a personal story, because if you're telling a personal story, you can get diverted in all sorts of different ways.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's again, I used it as kind of an edit, because I asked myself, now where's the moment here? And
But that brings up another point to me that this is a topic that I really love. And that is that when I write a story, and I sit down there and I make notes, and then I write, and I have another draft and another draft, I sort of want to tell those stories exactly as I wrote them, word for word, and do a lot of memorizing. And that's why a lot of stories I haven't told that I've written, because it's just too hard to memorize. But it's getting harder and harder every year.
actually, the older you get, that's going to go right out the window, Mary. I'll tell you.
I think so. I'm hoping so, because I enjoy hearing a story where people have perhaps made themselves notes, but it changes each time. But if I set up a joke or something, I need to have it exactly like that, so that.
Well, jokes are a special category that really you can't start a joke and then start the punchline and then go, oh, you needed to know the mother was blind.
Right.
You can do that with a story,
right.
But with a joke, it just kind of everything deflates and the momentum is gone and everything like that. But we've been talking and talking. But could you tell us a personal story?
All right. Yes.
Because we're almost halfway through the show, believe it or not.
Time flies. This is a story called New Friends. And I wrote this. I wrote it about my mother and my daughter, who never got a chance to meet. And so I feel like I'm the conduit between the two of them. Olivia is asleep. I tiptoe around her room, picking up naked Barbie dolls from the foot of her bed, the top of her dresser, and the sink of her play kitchen, where a few of them had been bathing. Olivia loves her Barbies. She told me the other day that she would marry Barbie. I didn't mention Ken. She'll find out about the competition soon enough. The Barbies all have blue eyes and happy, eager-to-please expressions, and they always seem to want to do whatever Olivia suggests, even when she throws them head first in the bathtub or dips them in finger paint up to the waist. The prize of Olivia's collection is Mermaid Barbie. She, like all her sisters, stands 12 inches tall, with thick blonde hair that falls to her waist. Mermaid Barbie wears a bikini halter top made of light blue iridescent clam shells and a long diaphanous blue skirt that fans out at the bottom into a pair of crisp pleated fins. They cover her tiny heel-clad feet and give the illusion that she is half Barbie, half fish, when she is really all Barbie. She is a siren, calling to her all the little girls who play at our house. They can't wait to see Barbie's streaks, pink and gray, turn into plain blonde in warm water and change back to pink and gray in cold water. Olivia's play with her Barbie consists chiefly in undressing them. She hasn't quite got the hang of getting their clothes back on. So at the end of the day, I gather up the naked Barbie dolls in their ball gowns, bathing suits, high heels, fins, and pedal pushers, and carry them to the couch. I've learned from my daughter's example to care for these friends of hers. I straighten their limbs and untangle their hair and begin dressing them, carefully choosing outfits and adding accessories. I'm absorbed in my work. I enjoy making the decisions because Olivia's the boss during the day. She's leading me down a wondrous path that I've never traveled on before. For I never had Barbies of my own. My twin brother and I were born 1 minute apart. He came first, I followed. We spent the rest of our time in the same configuration, the whole of our childhood. He was our fearless leader, and I his loyal rear guard. So whatever Michael did, played with, or wore, I had to do, play with, and wear myself. So my mother bought 2 of everything. 2 straw cowboy hats, 2 Mickey Mouse ears, 2 stick hobby horses with leather bridle and reins to be ridden around the range of our backyard. We twins were my mother's first children, and up until the time I arrived, well, she thought that girls played with dolls and hosted tea parties and wore frilly dresses. She thought that's all we did. And it was whenever my aunt or my grandmother presented me with a doll, I'd toss it away in favor of whatever truck or power toolkit my brother had just received. My explanation for my heartless behavior was simple. Michael doesn't play with dolls. On our 6th birthday, after the singing of Happy Birthday and the eating of many pieces of birthday cake, we were given our presents. I opened my box to find a beautifully dressed bride doll. It had been commissioned by my mother that a woman in her office would make it just for me. The bride was one of a kind and had been called Julia by its creator. Michael got a toy gas station with cars, a pickup truck, water-filled gas pumps that really worked, and 2 attendants. I don't remember much about the way Julia looked. She had a long, gauzy white veil held in place on her blonde head by a comb with pearls on it. Her white, scratchy dress winked at me from tiny crystal beads sewn all over it. It looked and felt like the dreaded dress I'd be making my first Holy Communion in later that year. Julia had white gloves, white stockings, white shoes, and she carried a small white purse with a rose on it. As I took her from her pink scented wrappings, I sensed the enormous strength of my mother's longing for me to cherish this doll, even at 6. So I lifted Barbie from her wrappings and I turned her slowly, seeing all of her. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Michael setting up his gas station in the living room. I hugged Barbie, felt her veil scratch my face and tickle my nose, and I smiled while one of my aunts took a picture. Michael, I noticed, had gone to the kitchen to fill his gas pumps with water. I tried to speak to this doll, but I couldn't think of anything to say. So after checking her small purse to see if it contained money, it didn't. I set her on the chair next to me and told her, I'll be right back. Then, without looking at my mother again, I popped up and made a beeline for the now up-and-running gas station. Michael and I spent the rest of the occasion filling gas tanks, checking oil, forcing the attendants to drink gasoline and die. Julia continued to sit, forlorn and neglected at the dining room table. Years later, my aunt told me that after she'd cleared the table and said goodbye to my godparents, my mother took Julia upstairs to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and held that beautiful bride doll in her arms and cried for a long time. And then she wrapped Julia back up in her pink scented wrappings and put her away in the closet. I never asked where she was. But I think of that 6th birthday as I pick out a lovely maroon and gold tea gown for Dance and Twirl Barbie to wear this evening. I slide the puffy tulle sleeves and gold bodice over her body, and I satisfy myself that all the seams are straight. I fit her tiny high heels on her perfect little feet, and I see again my mother's face across the dining room table, achy amidst the party favors, hats, and birthday cake. So I hug the Barbie I'm dressing to show my long dead mother what I've learned about love. And then I place Barbie on the couch with her sisters, stylish and ready for tomorrow's play.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you. But did you notice, I'd like to call to attention the fact that I said face. It's when I should have said feet. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that that's one of the big pitfalls, number one, of trying to rely on memorized work. And when you're just telling it as a story that could come out different ways each time.
How much is that memorized, like 98%?
That one is, yes.
Wow.
Completely. Wow. It's because, I think about a word, I'd like to have that word there. No, that word doesn't work, and I'll go to another word. And once I have it, and it's very hard for me to change. Not that I have any real interest in publishing stories or seeing them in print, but it's just something about the way I tell it.
Yeah, Margaret French has that method of coming up with the perfect word. She's worked in teaching people how to write, in fact. And then she goes through a process of sort of creating an outline from that, deconstructing everything she so carefully constructed to get to the oral version of it.
That's interesting. I think that's very interesting. So she gets it all right, and she is a writer, and she has a blog, I know too, where people can read things. But then she's got to take away all that and just have the outline or the structure.
Right. Now, Modiko, who is Japanese, was her first language. She does memorize, but then she works on coming up with a way of saying those memorized words so they don't sound memorized.
Yes.
So it's more subterfuge on her part.
Right, but I mean,
but since English is her second language, that may be the only way she can do it.
Right, but I mean, in this instance, you couldn't tell whether I memorized that or not, right?
Well, I'm familiar with that.
Let's come up with another very next one.
I wasn't really aware that you were doing it as a memorization.
Although you have heard me tell it before, and I pretty much tell it the same way.
But I've also read it, and But no, it didn't come out as
I'm glad you're giving me a chance to air all of these key details of my storytelling that I needed to clear up.
Well, it's kind of it's interesting conversation of method, and I think that the just to get back to my details on the moments, because the moment you craft the story around moments, really,
Right.
You and your brother being born, the 6th birthday party, the gas station, you and your mom a couple times, and you introduced the issue of your connection between your mom and your daughter. And you bring that wonderful closure back to the garden that you started to seed on the sofa, and that's just real art. And those elements, I mean, it's brave to set up the element that you did in terms of the relationship, because then people kind of are expecting that. So I was expecting to say, well, what's the bridge? What's the bridge? What's the bridge? And the bridge is so obvious by the time you get there that it's just beautiful.
Oh, good, good.
So,
And, you know, one of my takeaways is I've had the occasion that after my mother died, I realized her wisdom or could see one of our moments from her perspective as opposed to from mine and go, and say, sorry, I understand now. Thank you for not being so kind when I was so clueless.
And the other...
Not that you should have loved dolls, you know.
No, but I was going to say that's what people come to me and say most, is that they never loved dolls. And I think that maybe gives them permission to hear my story and then tell their own story, which they often do. But it's more from the standpoint, not so much of motherly wisdom, which is very interesting. I haven't heard that much. But more like, well, I didn't play with dolls, and, you know, this is how I turned out. And I felt bad about not playing with dolls, but I just didn't. So I like it when people introduce other ideas and other sides of it.
And your mother, I don't know what your mother's background was, but my thought was, as a child, she probably never had a doll as wonderful as Julia.
That's probably right.
And that she was so happy to give something that she never had to her daughter, not realizing that just wasn't your thing, when she might have noticed that. But she might have been wanting to fix her own childhood. Who knows?
Right.
I think we need to go on to coming attractions.
I think that's a good idea, Kate. And we have a full month of things starting off in September. And I think we're going to start the month on the 2nd.
Yes.
It really starts on the 2nd if you're a storyteller, at Arthur's Market in the Stockade. And we had a wonderful gathering there in July. We skipped August. And Claire Nolan is a wonderful storyteller, and her theme as the featured storyteller is stories that spin like wheels.
That's nice.
And this comes from the fact that she and her husband ride their bicycles almost everywhere. And so that'll be a hit. Johnny Norton, a friend of mine, will be there playing the keyboard. And we're going to have this recorded because I need to get a clean version of a story I want to put on a CD. So I'm going to tell that. So if you're coming to that open mic, and we can give you a CD with your story on it for you to take home and share. So there you go.
And then Gil Payette, who was on this show a few months ago, he will be telling both Saturday and Sunday, September 6th and 7th, at the East Green Bush Powwow, the gathering of the tribes. Storytelling at the Learning Circle. And he'll be doing 15-minute story sessions every 2 hours each day.
Wow.
Yes.
Go for it. But that's going to be a really wonderful gathering of, if you're at all interested in Native American culture and lore, that's the place to be.
And then, but you need to leave a little early on Sunday and go whoosh across the New York State Thruway to west of Amsterdam for the last Not Just for Kids storytelling. That's Sunday at 6 p.m. Where, oh, that's you.
It's me.
If the rivers could speak, the stories they'd tell.
And the series at Schoharie Crossing has just been wonderful this year. For those of you who have made it. And I'm pleased and privileged to be kind of the benediction on that. And those will be historical stories with their roots in the Mohawk Valley. So come out, and it's free.
Now, on Wednesday, September 10th, the second Wednesday of the month, the Saratoga Storytelling Open Mic will happen. Every other month, they're at Cafe Lena or at Woodlawn Commons. This September, they're at Cafe Lena, and the featured teller is Eliud Nieves, who comes from Ithaca, all the way from Ithaca, just to participate in our events. And he's a wonderful storyteller. Well worth your little trip to Saratoga to hear him.
And if you want to catch dinner before that 7 o'clock start, there are a number of really interesting and fine restaurants right across the street or right around the corner. The Thai place right across the street from Lena's, and the Merry Monk, if you're familiar with that from North Pearl Street, has opened up just around the corner from Lena's, and it's one of the great Belgian bars in our time.
What about Hattie's?
Hattie's Chicken House is right downstairs.
That's
and,
where I go.
and there's just so by all and Ben and Jerry's is just around the other corner.
Right.
So
And then opposite Ben and Jerry's, there's the vegetarian health food store.
I forget about the vegetarian.
At Saratoga, there's a wealth, and it'll be September, so most of the visitors will be gone.
That's right.
And
We
you
have
can
our
have a
town
parking
back.
space.
We have our
Yes.
town.
So, and then, very exciting, on Sunday, September 14th, we start our new season at Proctor's, Word Plays, Harmony and Discord, with Betty Cassidy, Claire Beetlestone, Eliud Nieves, me, Margaret French, Marnie Gillard, Mary Murphy, Meredith Nieves, and Nancy Marie Payne.
That's a great lineup.
Oh yeah.
I don't hear much discord in that group. But if you're interested in that, I'm sure you should show up.
And we have a new reduced price. We used to have a coupon for you to get the reduced price. Everybody gets the reduced price, which we can't mention because this is public access TV, but it's the same price you would pay to go to a movie. And this is live performance.
Well, and we also have another benefit. We do donate $2 of that ticket to the Sikkim Summer Lunch Program. And I served summer lunch in Jerry Burrell Park this past week, and the numbers are up. So I think we are going to do something like 12 or 15,000 lunches in Schenectady.
So we're only halfway through September. September is a wealth. We have our next Story Circle meeting right here at the Colonie Town Library, Tuesday the 26th at 6:30. You're welcome to just come and listen. We'll be sharing stories under development. The teller gets to control how much and what kind of feedback they get. Some tellers just say, I just wanted to tell it, thank you very much. Most people say, you can tell me the good stuff, the accolades. And then some people, their story is old enough that they're willing to hear the parts that didn't work, and if anyone has, some people even want suggestions. Then, the next weekend, the Saratoga Native American Festival, which happens every other year, is going to be a little earlier in September than usual, September 20th through 21st, and it's now going to be near the Victoria Pool.
Ooh,
They call
in the
that
park.
area, still in the Saratoga Spa State Park, the Victoria Pool Mall, which sounds sort of like stores for swimming equipment, but
Right.
it's the grassy area nearby the Victoria Pool.
That's our friend Joe Bruchak and his family,
Jesse and Jim.
Again, this is just a treasure of a resource for the region. Don't miss it if you have a chance.
And that's no admission fee also. That's also new. Now we're starting a pilot program in Salem, New York. Word plays at the Cabaret in the Fort Salem Theater. Siri Allison, who lives there, suggested, could we have a replay of what we do at Proctor's up there? So it would be a simple way of having more programs. So most of the tellers are the same, but due to scheduling conflicts and so forth, there are some differences. But that's starting September 21st at 2 p.m. It's just a little cheaper than at Proctor's. So we're very excited about that. And again, it'll be harmony and discord.
Kate, can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Just to get the camera back on me for a moment. No, that's not why.
Because you will be telling in both of those.
Yes, and in the Salem one, is it a theater? Is it an actual?
It's set up as a cabaret.
So it's
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So there'll be tables.
tables and rooms and
Oh,
coffee,
okay. Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that'll be
And-
nice.
Yeah, so it's not it's a smaller space than their theater space,
Right.
but it's in the same building.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
And,
You may proceed.
And our strategy is just to use our material another time in a place where we can perhaps develop a market for storytelling. And it is in a pretty noted summer stock. So, and it's also in a community where Hubbard Hall also does some storytelling, so the medium is known
Well,
there. Somewhat.
Hubbard Hall is a nearby community.
Nearby community, yeah.
Cambridge.
That's right, Cambridge, right.
Yeah, down the road.
That's right, this is in
Salem.
Salem, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so we're hoping the people that go to Harmony Hall will come to this, and people from from Saratoga, for instance, who go all the way to Schenectady, will go, oh yeah, let's go to Salem. That's not that far. Then to close off our productions, or the storytelling productions in September, Julia Child and Other Remarkable People, starting our 16th season of Story Sundays at the Glenn Sanders Mansion, a storytelling dinner series. I will be telling Julia Child stories, and Betty Cassidy will be telling Other Remarkable People stories.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Now, Julia Child is a very famous French chef, right?
Yes.
And she wrote a book, right?
She's American.
Yes.
And so, is there anything special other than your stories that's going to happen relative to Julia Child?
I'm
that night?
so glad you asked, Joe. We hadn't practiced this at all, can't you tell? Oh, Joe, what a wonderful lead-in. Glenn Sanders has been nice enough to create a special Julia Child menu, which you can see on your screen. They usually do very good stuff, but for instance, the salad this time will be baby green salad with poached pears, grapes, goat's cheese, and champagne vinaigrette.
That sounds good. Hold the vinaigrette, okay?
Oh, the vinaigrette. Well, you can ask. They're very accommodating. If you're gluten-free, if you're low salt, or whatever.
No, I was thinking just drink the champagne.
Sorry. Right. There's a corner bar.
Didn't Julia have a little sauterne she used to hit?
I think she did. All the great ones,
She
too.
liked a reverse martini, vermouth with just a splash of gin.
Gin.
Yeah, I don't know what she. I
That's
don't know
what it
what
was.
she.
It wasn't sauterne. It was just.
I don't know what she drank on the show. I think it was just wine. But anyways, so and if you're, most times you have a choice of 3 entrees. This time you'll have this entree, the classic roasted chicken with lemon and rosemary butter, sautéed vegetables, and Duchess potatoes.
Ooh.
But if you're vegetarian, they can accommodate that. So you can make reservations. And that brings us to, if for some reason you can't come or you want to share your newfound love of storytelling, point your friends to storycircle@proctors.org and have them click on YouTube, where you can find over 100 stories
Right.
that have been taped mostly right here at this table. So, phew, coming attractions are done.
Man, oh man, that's more than a full plate. Mm-hmm. Julia Child would be proud of me for that.
Oh!
It went over our heads again.
Yeah, you had to
yeah.
point it out. Yeah, come around again. But,
I had that little hit of red wine while the camera was off me. That's okay.
Yes. So we have 9.5 minutes left. Do you have a 9-minute story?
Well, I don't have a 9-minute story, but I was hoping that we might be able to talk about personal stories, which
Okay.
was great. We did.
Okay.
But then move over into a brief thing about folk tales, which is how we all got started pretty much, and the stories in the public domain. So I have a story called The Split Dog. And I think I'll tell that for you now. This is an old Appalachian folk tale that's been handed down and handed down and handed down, or handed up, if you will. I had me a little dog once. It was the best rabbit hunting dog you ever saw. Well, he was running after a rabbit one day, and some fool had left a scythe lying in the grass with the curved blade pointed straight up. Well, the dog didn't see it. And he was running so hard and so fast that he ran smack into it, split him open. 2 2 pieces. Oh, lucky thing I was there. So I went over and I scooped up half of my dog in one hand, and I scooped up the other half of my dog in the other hand, and I slapped them back together again. Then I took off my coat, and I wrapped him up in that right quick, and I put him in a box, and I set him near the stove. I could see he was still breathing a little bit, and I didn't want to lose this little dog of mine, so every night I'd keep him near the stove, and during the day I'd bring him outside, let the warm rays of the sun pour down on him. I did this for 3 weeks before I finally got up the nerve to look in the box and see if he was all right. But one day I looked in, and I saw him start to wiggle a little bit, so I said, "Oh, Mary, you're on the right track, you're on the right track." He's wiggling a little bit. So I kept him bandaged for another 3 weeks. And then one time I was walking along past that box, and don't you know, I heard him bark. So I was so happy. I took him out of the box, I brought him outside, I started unwrapping him, and in a few minutes, out he jumped, spry as ever. But, don't you know, I did a terrible thing to that little dog of mine. Remember when I put him back together? I put him back together wrong way, too. He had 2 legs sticking up in the air, 2 legs down on the ground. Half of his head was pointing north, and the other half of his head was pointing south. I looked at my dog, and I said, "Oh, no, I ruined my little dog. I just ruined him." My little dog was looking up at me with half of his tongue going, Lord knows where the other half was, but I think it was down by his tail. So anyway, I was crying like the dickens, and he's panting. When all at once, my little dog saw another rabbit, and he took off running after it. And you know, he turned out to be an even better rabbit hunting dog after that. He'd run on 2 legs till he got tired, and he'd flip right over and run on the other 2. Lord, that dog could run going and coming. And you know what else he could do? He could bark at both ends. That's a story about my dog. Thank you.
Bob.
Post-story drum roll.
I think that was a wonderful rendition of an old keeper.
Yes, thank you.
Even though we all knew about it, it was still wonderful to listen to.
Well, see, and that's the thing, too, is that this kind of story, it's so easy not to have the right words in your mouth, because I should learn from this myself, because you can just say whatever comes to mind as long as you keep that story on track, because other people will tell that story, and it'll be completely different. Different words, same plot perhaps, but different words, different ways of getting there.
Yeah. The very first storytelling workshop I went to was at the now defunct Hudson Valley Storytelling Festival. It was a workshop given by Davis Bates, a storyteller in Western Massachusetts, and he said, "You don't have to memorize. Your story is a series of scenes or moments, and what you're doing is you're taking your listeners around that scene as a reporter. And so sometimes you could circle one way and sometimes you could circle another, but you want to hit, there are some key points you want to hit. And you kind of need to remember how you get from one scene to another." That was his recipe for telling.
Let me ask something, because I know we only have a few minutes, but you have been on the national scene, so to speak. Are people a little resentful that now personal stories are kind of in the forefront, or they've got all this wealth of other material that's right there?
Well, especially, it's not only the personal stories, but at the National Storytelling Festival, which takes place the first weekend in October every year in a little bitty town in eastern Tennessee, they have been concentrating on humorous stories and tall tales and leaving the folk tales and often the personal stories behind. And yes, I know some tellers who go, folk tales, they are so important that the reason that they survived is that they've had meaning for every single generation, and that they should not be lost because they're important. Now, I do happen to have a couple of stories that have a personal framework, but have the folk tale in the middle. I kind of stumbled into that once, and then the second time I did it more deliberately. Yeah. But a lot of people, I've also talked to people who understand personal stories. They're easy to relate to. The folk tales, they go, "Oh, that's just that old stuff." Oh, and my husband said once, what's with these talking animals?
These talking-
And so I told him, well, certain Native American tribes believe that the animals were created first. They were the first people. And so it is natural to them that, of course, they would be talking.
Yes.
Long, long ago, when animals could still talk.
Right.
And so that helped him go with the flow.
Yeah.
What I like about the folk tales is that they were created orally. Nobody wrote them
Nobody
down
wrote them
until
down.
a long time later, and that goes for pretty much all of them. I'm not sure what every culture, but I think it was a talking story. And then later on, when we needed to have them in books so we all could enjoy them, that's when they were put down.
Right.
But they're burnished and polished.
Right, and then they've traveled, and so there's an Irish version of One Wish,
Right.
and there's a Jewish version of One Wish, and virtually every Muslim story that folktale I've heard a Jewish one because they come from the same area.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that should bring them together. These fundamental stories that they all tell and enjoy.
Right, and when you hear somebody doing an Irish story and say, no, that's a Middle Eastern story, but
Right.
they just change it.
But it's meaningful to all these different people. It's
Right.
just, we're people are people, huh?
Yep.
And they have families and
And it's interesting that we talked about a generalizable event in the personal story, and what the folktale represents is that generalizable connection. Whether it's the story about the blacksmith and the devil, and there's a whole range of stories.
once there were a king and queen and they wanted a child.
Right.
You've got the people, you've got the crisis. Well, one sentence, they don't even have names.
Right.
And it just, so I think that's if there's a crossover, it's in a way the personal story may be a little bit of an adaptation of this message from the folktale.
Right.
And an adaptation may be the most sincere form of flattery, if you think about that. But
When I was in Phoenix, I went to a workshop about a moth-like series that they're holding out there. The Moth has been going on for over 10 years in New York City and now in other places. It's exclusively personal stories, often by people who are not tellers, but may have experience with story. But it's sponsored by the newspaper out there, the Arizona Republic, and they sponsor it because they feel they, as a newspaper, tell people stories. And this series that they have also tells people stories. And they feel they are building a community. That when you hear somebody's story and you can relate to it, it brings people together.
Yes, it certainly
And they don't have any competition. In the Moth, there's often who's the winner. But
Right.
that they don't do that. And we have 31 seconds left, so I think we could just thank you very much.
Oh, you're
for
welcome.
thank you, Mary Murphy.
I
Thank
hope you didn't
Kate
mind that
Dudding.
at times I was the interviewer.
I
Not at all.
I was the guest.
I was thinking sometime if Joe can't come, I know who to invite for my.
And I wish
I can talk for a while.
I wish you weren't so shy. Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and thank you for
Thank you for
coming
listening.
too. We hope you come back.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spin